Hello, my name is Chris Lehman. I'm a musician based out of the greater Boston area. Thank you for stopping by my channel. And today I would like to take you through my take on the reverby, spacious, emotional piano sound. I'd like to just take you through the processing that I've got. Pretty similar to some other tutorials out there, but I think that there are a few settings that really, if you're not familiar with, can make a big difference in getting that awesome, emotional, cinematic piano sound. And you don't necessarily need the most expensive piano VST in the world in order to get something that sounds really beautiful and emotional. So yeah, this is going to be a little bit of a quicker video compared to the composing in the style of videos, which I plan to continue to do, but I think that this sound is pretty darn cool, so I wanted to make a quick little video on my take on it. So let's hop right on over into Ableton, and we're going to take a look. Okay, so here we are in Ableton. I have got the Midi up, downloaded from MuseCore of one of Olafur Arnold's tracks from his album Remember. It is labeled as beginner on MuseCore, so I'm not sure. It's not the most complex piano piece in the world, but I wanted to download something that sounds really beautiful and inspiring, which is classic Olafur sound, but also something that wasn't too crazy MIDI-wise, so that you could see how something relatively simple can sound really beautiful and luscious with a little bit of the right processing. So what I'm going to do first and foremost is let me turn all the processing off and give you a brief preview of what this sounds like. These are the Originals Intimate Grand Piano from Spitfire. I've got the Intimate preset on. I'm not sure I've changed anything other than maybe lowering the hammers percentage here a little bit, because when you add a lot of reverb, they can really stick out and get a little too muddy. So I turned those down a little bit, but minus that, it's just the Intimate preset. And here is what that piece sounds like if you're not familiar with it. So one quick thing right off the bat, in order to get this to sound a little bit cooler, is we can hop into our MIDI. This is the left hand. And we can just, since this is MIDI downloaded from MuseCore, it all comes down, it's all like perfectly robotically, the velocities are sort of dead, perfect, consistent, as you can see here. So if we just randomize those a little bit, even just that little change is going to make a big difference in the end and getting this to sound a little bit more realistic. So I do this with certainly any piano, any shorts, articulations, anything that's velocity sensitive. Even if I play it in, I sometimes will add a little bit more randomness, but definitely if I programmed it in, adding the randomness, it makes a huge difference, and it's like 2 clicks. So I don't know if this will be really noticeable, but it's something that's important to take into account. So that's going to be step 1 in getting the piano sound that we want. After that, let me start to take you through some of the processing to get this to sound a little magical. So the first thing I'm going to go over is the Main Reverb. So what I've got here is I'm using a send to send this through a 100% wet reverb. Now this is from Slate. Well, it's from Liquid Sonics, but you get this in the Slate Everything bundle. This is the Verb Suite Classic. I've got this St. Peter's Cathedral preset on, and I don't think I've tweaked much of anything at all. Believe that this is pretty much the preset as it is. So we're running the piano through a reverb. which of course it's a nice reverb. It's a big reverb. It's got a pretty big decay on it compared to what you might otherwise use. So this is going to be the first step in getting that sound, right, is adding a pretty big reverb. So this is at dry, and I'm going to slowly bring this in. Now that's a little much, so we're going to bring that down to like -8. But you'll notice that this is the dilemma that we run into. This is the primary thing that we're trying to tackle, the primary issue when it comes to really soaking a sound in reverb, is that you lose the clarity, right? So if I get this up to a point where it sounds really big and spacious, like it's really being played in the cathedral, all of a sudden this just turns into a pile of mud. So, there are a couple things we can do to help with this. First and foremost, before your reverb, I like to add a little bit of EQ, cutting out a little bit of the lows and a little bit of the highs, just because we don't need those frequencies coming through the reverb. This is really about the middle spacious sound, and these are just going to do nothing but muddy it. They're not really going to add anything. So this is going to make a little bit of a difference. But the big thing that's going to help this sit in the mix well, and is going to help this have the clarity of the attack of the piano, which is such a percussive instrument. We really want to hear the transients of the piano, that initial like. So what I've done here is I've added a dynamic EQ. So this is effectively functioning as sidechain, where the reverb is being sidechained to the original piano source. So when I hit a note now, you can notice that there's gain reduction going on. This middle gray line is sort of at dB0, and you can think of these curves here as being like EQ curves, but instead of cutting out the frequencies just automatically by this much, they're triggered by how much gain there is in that frequency band, and that's how much gain reduction that it applies. So it's like sort of like almost, you can think of it as like a multi-band compressor that's sidechained, something along those lines, where there's more being taken away. If you look at the line of gain reduction, I've got it set up with this sort of interesting curve where there's a fair amount being taken away in the mids and the extreme lows, and then a little bit less in the highs. But this is acting like a side chain in that it is ducking these frequencies. It's just not completely even as if it were just a normal side chain compressor. And this is just this is a curve that I like. I think it sounds good, and it lets some of the frequencies through that I want without ducking all of the frequencies or letting them all through. So the only important setting here to really get right is just to make sure you've got a really pretty fast attack and a really relatively long release. The emotional piano sound comes from that sort of delay. It's like we're almost trying to create like a pad in the background with our reverb, where we hit our note, and then you'll notice that there's a pretty big delay before the reverb really pops in, whereas opposed to without this on, like the transient's just completely gone and the attack of that note disappears. And then with this on, we still sort of get that awesome transient, but with the reverb coming in, it almost sounds like this like pad that's part of the same patch. Compared to so that is going to be the biggest thing in getting this sound, in my opinion, is some sort of side chain going on where you're side chaining your reverb to your original dry signal, and giving it a pretty long release so that it sort of ducks in slowly, that the reverb comes up slowly. As the note decays, as the dry note decays, the reverb comes up. So you can think of one is going down while the other's going up, and they create this like X of volume, which is really satisfying to listen to. Just like with just a simple E minor chord, we get this awesome sound. Now the only thing I'm adding to the end of this chain is just a ever so slight pitch shift. It's like 0.04 cents, just to slightly change the reverb from the dry sound. I don't know. It's a small thing that doesn't do a ton. And you can see I've even got the mix down at like 20% here. So this is barely audible, but I think it does a little bit to change the reverb, help the reverb stand out without having to bump it up in wetness anymore. So that's the chain that I'm using for my main reverb sound. The next thing I'm doing in order to get this to sound bigger and more cinematic is adding some processing to the pianos themselves directly. So the first thing I've got is pretty standard EQ, just cutting out the stuff we can't hear that's going to do nothing but muddy up our mix. Then I've got let me turn these off and I'll add them one by one. So the first thing is the EQ, which barely going to be able to hear, right? The next is a filter, which isn't doing it's not cutting off a ton, just a little bit of the high end. It's not that noticeable. But part of this emotional sound, in my opinion, is that we don't want too much high end. This is a very low mid centered sound that we're looking for, particularly when we get down in our lower registers in our piano. That's that feeling that it brings on at us where we close our eyes and get the sort of goosebumps of listening to someone play piano, that works really well in TV and film, and just to listen to, because just listening to it on its own sounds really great. But the other thing that we get out of this is when we play the piano up in the high register, we're avoiding getting too much like crispiness. Whereas without this, it's barely doing anything. Like if I were to make this more extreme, right? Which could be a sound we're going for if we want it to be really soft. But I have it somewhere up around here for now. And then after that, the processing that is going on is I've got this Slate virtual mix rack where I'm running it through the New York preamp just to give it a little bit of analog feel. And then through a channel, through an EQ, which isn't doing anything, but just for the harmonics of running it through the EQ, and then a little bit of compression going on with the FG stress here. You can see that there's a little bit of gain reduction, not a ton. So this isn't doing a ton, but it's just sort of giving it it's helping to give it that analog replicated sound where it feels a little bit more alive and a little bit more warm. So without this on, play a chord, and then with it on, I think that there's a little bit of gain coming out of the compressor. So it's adding a little bit of volume, which is making it sound like it's doing more than it is, but it's just giving it a little bit of warmth. And then the next thing is very classic pianos sound. Everything sounds great through OTT, but pianos in particular sound beautiful. So just a small amount here, but to give it a little bit more of that crispy, edgy sound. So with that off, and with it on, giving that a little bit of the bite that we want. And then at the end, we are running it through a tape machine once again to give it some analog feel. So we've already got something that sounds pretty darn good compared to if I turn the reverb off and turn all this processing off. We've got this sound. And then with it back on. So now if I play the MIDI from Olafur's track here, we get something which sounds pretty darn good. Now there's one more thing that I want to add, which is a little bit of some sort of reverb or delay that's doing a little bit of like pitch shifting. Okay, so the second reverb that I'm sending this through is Valhalla Shimmer. Now, the important thing that the important thing that I want out of this sound is not so much the sound of the shimmer, which is nice. This is just the Valhalla Shimmer sound when it's wet. But what I really want out of this is I want this feedback. So this is going to be sending the signal after it's been put through the reverb back into itself. And in combination with the shift, we get these really high magical sounds coming out of the reverb all of a sudden. And those are what I really want to be coming out of and to sort of be creating this pad sound. Now, if you wanted, you could go the other direction. Wrong. Wrong note. But I like it going up an octave, at least to start. Pretty darn cool sound. So I've got that running through a second send with a little bit less being run through it. And then the other thing, the next piece of processing I've got going on after the shimmer is this pancake plugin, which is just, it's a panning plugin. So now the shimmer is going to be bouncing back and forth between the left and right signals. If you've got headphones or studio monitors on, you can really hear that, which given the context of the fact that there is a fair amount of delay coming into this sound, which is I'm creating next in the chain, this is a really cool ethereal effect. So after that, this time I've got just a straight sidechain compressor going on, where, once again, it's sidechains to the dry piano. I've got it on pre-effects here. And then my one group is the pianos. So relatively light ratio, pretty darn fast attack, and a pretty darn slow release, 900 milliseconds here. And now you can see with the gain reduction that's going on, we're once again getting the wave of these shifted harmonic reverby sounds coming through, but sort of delayed after the initial attack of the piano. If I just hold down a chord, you'll see that the initial gain reduction is about 6 or 7 dB, and if I just hold it down, it'll naturally rise itself back up to 0, and so the reverb gets louder as the sound of the piano gets quieter. Which is exactly what we want. And then I've got a little bit of pitch shift again. Maybe even a little more than I want. And then after that, I'm using Ozone as a imager here, where I'm widening up the extreme highs are getting, I'm really widening them out, and then a little bit less with the sort of mid highs, and then these mids here are getting a little bit less, and then down in our low frequencies isn't getting any width added to them, but that's adding sort of this sound. And if I turn that off again, it's a little less wide in the mix. This is really about filling out the width, and I don't want it getting in the way of the mids at all, which is the main piano. I'm trying to leave as much room for the clarity of the original piano sound as possible. So again, helping in that by adding another EQ to the end of the chain to really make sure I'm just getting the frequencies that I want. Anything below 100, we don't really need. So now, when we add this shimmer reverb on top of our sort of main cathedral sound, on top with a little bit of processing here, now all of a sudden we get this really magical, like this is in my opinion like sort of the finished sound. Those are just simple major minor chords, but through this processing, it sounds really, really magical. So the beauty of this is that you can play these really soft, slow-moving chords and really allow that reverb tail to kick in. It sounds awesome. But when you've got something moving a little faster, like this piece from Olafur, because of the sidechain that we've got going on in both reverbs, it's not getting too muddy. So we're hearing a little bit less of the reverb, but that's because we're playing in notes faster. So let me just give this a play, and it sounds great. It's just a little bit different than the slow, sort of bulky, just chords. But and then if we play something in a little faster, which is above my piano skills, we get this sound. Beautiful stuff. Now, of course, when you start adding in other instruments, you're going to have to tone this down. This is like meant to fill out a really piano-centric sound. This in the context of a full orchestra, probably not going to work in a mix. But it's sounds beautiful on its own. If you've got a piece which primarily is a piano piece, then something like this, maybe with the reverb just turned down a little bit, is going to sound great. The other thing that this is really great for is when you're just jamming around and looking for inspiration. I find that if I'm doing a sketch for a piece, sometimes having something which sounds super inspirational and great on its own can be a little bit of a problem because it's hard to move on from it if your plan is for it not to be a piano-based piece. But if you're just looking for harmony, melody, just playing around, improvising, having something which just sounds so good on its own. It just makes it more fun, and anything we can do to make it a little more fun, I think is worth it. So I hope you enjoyed that tutorial and learned a thing or two. If you have any questions, please do leave them down in the comments, and I will catch you all next time. Take care.